April 29th, 1975. 0400 hours. Tan Son Nut Air Base, Saigon, South Vietnam. The 122 Luminor rocket screams over the runway and detonates between two C-130 Hercules transports, punching a crater 8 feet deep into the tarmac and shredding both aircraft with white-hot shrapnel. Air Force Master Sergeant James Bolton doesn't flinch anymore. This is the 11th rocket impact in the past 40 minutes. He keeps walking across the flight line past rows of perfectly functional UH-1 Huey helicopters lined up like dominoes, their rotor blades tied down, their fuel tanks topped off, their instrument panels gleaming in the pre-dawn darkness. Not one of them will leave this base. Bolton's clipboard lists 53 helicopters in this section alone. Every single one is flight ready. He's spent the past 3 years maintaining these birds, teaching South Vietnamese pilots how to perform pre-flight checks, replacing transmission assemblies, calibrating instruments. Now he's been ordered to count them one final time before American forces evacuate. Not to prep them for flight, not to destroy them, just to count them, and then to leave them. Behind him, the operations tower burns. Another rocket found its mark 20 minutes ago, killing 2 air traffic controllers who'd stayed at their posts trying to coordinate the chaos. The entire air base is dissolving into pandemonium. South Vietnamese Air Force personnel are hot-wiring aircraft and attempting to take off without clearance. American Marines are establishing a defensive perimeter around the Defense Attaché Office compound, where thousands of Vietnamese civilians are scaling the walls, desperate for evacuation. And somewhere beyond the perimeter fence, North Vietnamese Army units are advancing through Saigon's northern suburbs. Bolton reaches the maintenance hangar at the end of the helicopter line. Inside, the fluorescent lights still hum. Tool chests stand open, wrenches and sockets organized by size. A half-finished engine overhaul sits on a workbench. The turbine housing opened up to reveal clean, oiled components. Technical manuals are stacked on desks. Parts inventory sheets are pinned to corkboards. Everything is exactly as it should be, except that in approximately 4 hours, this will all belong to the enemy. He moves to the next section of the flight line. Here sit the A-37 Dragonfly attack aircraft, their wings heavy with empty rocket pods and bomb racks. 32 aircraft, all operational, all fueled, all abandoned. The South Vietnamese Air Force had been flying combat missions with these jets just yesterday. This morning, they're monuments to a war that's ending not with a bang, but with a frantic sprint to the exits. A Marine Corps CH-53 Sea Stallion thunders overhead, coming in fast from the east. It doesn't land on the runway. There's no time, and the runway's taking rocket fire. Instead, it settles onto a patch of grass near the DAO compound, its rotor wash flattening everything within 50 feet. The rear ramp drops before the wheels fully touch down, and Vietnamese refugees pour toward it, clutching children and small bags containing everything they couldn't bear to leave behind. The loadmaster is screaming at them to board quickly, his voice lost in the turbine roar. 70 people cram into a space designed for 38. The helicopter struggles into the air, visibly overloaded, and claws its way toward the coast and the aircraft carriers waiting offshore. Bolton watches it disappear into the gray dawn sky, then looks back at his clipboard. He's supposed to document the condition of each piece of equipment. Serviceable, unserviceable, destroyed. He knows what headquarters wants. They want him to write "destroyed" next to every line item so that when Congress asks questions, when journalists write their stories, when historians try to piece together what happened during the final days, there will be paperwork showing that American forces properly denied this equipment to the enemy. But Bolton knows the truth. In the maintenance records building, 300 yards behind him, filing cabinets contain complete maintenance logs for every aircraft, every vehicle, every piece of equipment on this base. Those cabinets are locked, but they're not being destroyed. In the armory, on the base's southern edge, 70,000 M16 rifles are racked and ready, along with enough ammunition to sustain a division for 6 months. The demolition teams that were supposed to render that armory unusable never arrived. They're trapped somewhere in the city, cut off by NVA advance units. Another rocket impacts, this one close enough that Bolton feels the concussion in his chest. The explosion lights up a fuel depot on the base's western perimeter. Within seconds, secondary explosions begin as 55-gallon drums of JP-4 jet fuel ignite in sequence, creating a rolling wall of orange flame that climbs 200 feet into the air. The heat is intense, even at this distance. Bolton can see figures silhouetted against the flames. South Vietnamese soldiers probably trying to salvage what they can before the Americans leave and the North Vietnamese arrive. His radio crackles. All remaining U.S. personnel report to assigned evacuation points. Operation Frequent Wind is now in effect. Repeat. Frequent Wind is in effect. Prepare for immediate helicopter extraction. Bolton takes one last look at the helicopters, the aircraft, the vehicles, the mountains of equipment that represent America's 20-year investment in this country. $5 billion, someone told him. That's what the brass calculated as the value of everything being left behind. But numbers don't capture it. Each of these helicopters represents thousands of hours of American labor. The factory workers in Connecticut who assembled them, the logistics specialists who shipped them across the Pacific, the mechanics like Bolton who kept them flying. All of that effort, all of that expertise, all of that treasure, about to be handed over to the enemy without a fight. He drops the clipboard in the dirt and walks toward the evacuation point. To 30 miles offshore, aboard the USS Blue Ridge in the South China Sea, Rear Admiral Donald Whitmire stares at a map that no longer represents reality. The colored pins showing secure evacuation routes are meaningless now. Half those roads are cut off by NVA units. The blue circles marking South Vietnamese Army defensive positions are fiction. Most of those units have dissolved, their soldiers discarding uniforms and weapons to blend into the civilian population. The only truth on this map is the red arrow pointing straight at Saigon from the north, and that arrow is moving faster than anyone predicted. Whitmire's operations officer, Commander Robert Warren, sets a fresh teletype message on the desk. It's from Military Sealift Command in Subic Bay. Admiral, they're asking again about the equipment. They say they can divert 3 roll-on, roll-off cargo ships if we can guarantee 48 hours of secure loading operations. Whitmire doesn't look up from the map. What's the current estimate on how long we have before NVA forces reach the port facilities? 12 hours, sir. Maybe less. Then tell Subic Bay there won't be any cargo ships. There won't be any 48 hours. Whitmire traces a finger along the coastline. Every helicopter we have is pulling people out. That's it. That's all we can do now. Warren knows the Admiral is right, but the numbers still stagger him. At Bien Hoa Air Base, 30 miles north of Saigon, there are 47 A-37 attack aircraft sitting on the ramp. At Binh Thuy Air Base in the Mekong Delta, there's an entire squadron of C-123 provider transports. At Camp Alpha, the Army Logistics Depot near Long Binh, there are 800 M113 armored personnel carriers in various states of repair, but most of them are operational. At the Newport docks in Saigon, there are 53,000 tons of ammunition, from rifle rounds to 155mm artillery shells. And none of it will leave Vietnam. What about demolition? Warren asks. Can we at least... There isn't time. Whitmire finally looks up, and Warren can see the exhaustion in his eyes. Do you know how long it takes to properly destroy a helicopter? Not just disable it, but actually render it permanently unusable? 45 minutes per aircraft if you have thermite grenades and cutting torches. We have over 500 helicopters scattered across South Vietnam. That's 375 man-hours of demolition work, and we don't have 375 man-hours. We don't have 75 man-hours. We have whatever time it takes the NVA to finish rolling through the city. In the Intelligence Center one deck below, CIA analyst Frank Snepp is compiling a different kind of inventory. He's been in Vietnam for 4 years, and he knows exactly what's sitting in warehouses, depots, and armories across the country because he's the one who tracked it all. His reports to Washington have been increasingly frantic over the past 2 weeks, each one emphasizing the catastrophic intelligence failure unfolding in real time. Snepp's latest assessment sits on his desk stamped "Secret" in red ink across the top. The document lists captured equipment by category: aircraft, 877 helicopters, UH-1, AH-1, CH-47, 73 A-37 attack aircraft, 36 C-130 transports, 26 C-123 transports, 940 M41 Walker Bulldog tanks, and M113 APCs. Artillery, 1 plus 105mm and 155mm howitzers, 80 plus 175mm self-propelled guns. Small arms, estimated 791 M16 rifles, 76,000 M60 machine guns, 12,000 M79 grenade launchers. Ammunition, estimated 15 million rounds of small arms ammunition, 1 million artillery rounds. Vehicles, 73,000 plus trucks, jeeps, and general-purpose vehicles. Communications, equipment, complete inventories from 44 major installations, crypto equipment, radio systems, telephone exchanges. But even these numbers don't tell the full story. At the Saigon Naval Shipyard, there are 26 patrol boats perfectly maintained waiting for crews that will never arrive. At Cam Ranh Bay, there's an entire hospital's worth of medical equipment, x-ray machines, surgical theaters, generators, ambulances, that was supposed to be evacuated last week, but wasn't because someone in Saigon kept insisting there was still time. There isn't time. Snep picks up his phone and dials the defense attaché office. Major General Homer Smith answers on the first ring. He hasn't slept in 3 days. General, it's Snep. Sir, I need to know. Are we destroying the crypto equipment? There's a long pause. Frank, we're destroying what we can. The burn barrels at the DIO have been going continuously for 2 days. We've destroyed the classified documents we can reach. But the crypto equipment at the field sites, the communication centers at the provincial capitals. Another pause. Most of those sites were overrun before we could send demolition teams. Snep closes his eyes. Cryptographic equipment. The enemy will now have access to American communication protocols, code systems, and encryption methods that took decades to develop. They'll study them, share them with the Soviets, and every allied nation that depends on U.S. communication security will have to start from scratch. What about the intelligence files? Snep asks, though he already knows the answer. The paper files are burning. The computer tapes. Smith's voice trails off. Frank, we have Vietnamese employees who've worked with us for years. People who trusted us. Their names are in those files. Their families, their addresses, everything. And we don't have time to get them all out. At Tan Son Nhut, in a nondescript building near the flight line, 3 Air Force intelligence specialists are making the same impossible calculations. Captain Richard Armitage stands in front of a storage room containing 1,200 reels of computer tape. Each tape contains reconnaissance photographs, signals, intelligence data, and analysis from years of operations. Together, they represent America's complete understanding of North Vietnamese military capabilities, road networks, supply systems, and defensive installations. The tapes are heavy. Each reel weighs about 10 pounds. That's 12,000 pounds of intelligence data. Armitage looks at his 2 assistants, then at the single truck they've been allocated for evacuation. The truck can carry maybe 30 reels if they pack it carefully. That leaves 1,170 reels. Sir, we could destroy them, one assistant suggests. Burn them, or these tapes don't burn easily, Armitage says. Mylar and magnetic coating. They take hours to destroy properly, and we'd need to do it in a proper incinerator to make sure the data is actually corrupted. He looks out the window at the burning fuel depot, the rocket impacts walking across the tarmac, the chaos of the evacuation. We don't have hours. They load 30 reels, the most recent intelligence, the most sensitive operations data. The rest stays behind. By Aero 800 hours, the scale of abandonment is becoming clear to everyone involved. Marine Corps helicopter pilots flying evacuation runs can see it from the air. The long columns of South Vietnamese vehicles streaming south toward the coast, soldiers abandoning their posts, entire bases simply emptying out as people flee, and in every direction, on every base, in every depot, the equipment remains. Helicopters with their rotors still tied down, artillery pieces with their breech blocks still installed, trucks with keys in the ignition. One pilot, Captain Jerry Berry, makes his 6th trip of the morning from Tan Son Nhut to the USS Hancock. Each time he lands at the airbase, he sees more abandoned equipment and fewer American personnel. On this run, as he lifts off with 42 evacuees crammed into his CH-46, he flies directly over the vehicle depot at Long Binh. From 1,500 feet, it looks like a parking lot for a massive truck dealership. Rows and rows of vehicles perfectly aligned, not a single one damaged. Barry counts at least 200 trucks before he stops counting. He knows the North Vietnamese are watching, he knows they can see the same thing he sees, and he knows that in a few hours, all of it will be theirs. At 1100 hours, the main gate at Tan Son Nhut Air Base ceases to exist as a functional barrier. 2,000 South Vietnamese civilians, many of them former employees of American agencies, press against the chain-link fence with enough collective force that the posts begin to bend. South Vietnamese army soldiers who were supposed to be maintaining security abandon their positions, some to join the crowd trying to get inside, others simply disappearing into the city. An American Marine Corps lieutenant named Terry Bennington watches the fence buckle and realizes that the orderly evacuation plan they'd rehearsed last month is completely meaningless now. "Fall back to the Dao compound," he orders his squad. "We can't hold this perimeter." As the Marines withdraw, the crowd surges through the broken gate. But these aren't looters in the traditional sense. Most of them are running toward the helicopter landing zones, clutching papers, employment records, letters of recommendation from American supervisors, anything that might prove they worked with the Americans and deserve evacuation. They stream past millions of dollars worth of equipment without touching it, focused entirely on survival. But behind them, a different wave is coming. South Vietnamese Air Force Lieutenant Nguyen Van Bai has been awake for 36 hours straight, and he's made a decision that will haunt him for the rest of his life, assuming he survives the next few hours. He's standing in the cockpit of a UH-1H Huey helicopter that isn't his, hot-wiring the ignition system while his younger brother and sister crouch in the cargo bay. Bay has flown Hueys for 3 years, and he knows this aircraft is in perfect condition. The Americans didn't disable it. They didn't drain the fuel. They just left it. The turbine spools up with its characteristic whine. Bay's hands move through the start sequence automatically, years of training taking over despite his exhaustion and fear. Within 90 seconds, the rotor blades are turning. He doesn't file a flight plan. He doesn't request clearance. He simply lifts off, pointing the helicopter toward the coast, toward the American ships, toward any chance of escape. Behind him, 6 other South Vietnamese pilots are doing the same thing. Some are stealing helicopters, others are taking the aircraft they've been flying for years. Aircraft that technically belong to the South Vietnamese Air Force, but which everyone knows were paid for with American dollars and will soon belong to the North Vietnamese regardless. Major Nguyen Thanh Trung makes a different choice. He sits in the cockpit of an A-37 Dragonfly attack aircraft at Bien Hoa Air Base, and instead of fleeing south toward the ships, he turns north. Trung has been planning this moment for 18 months. He's not fleeing. He's defecting. He's been a North Vietnamese agent embedded in the South Vietnamese Air Force since 1973, and now he's bringing them a gift, a fully functional American attack aircraft, complete with weapon systems, avionics, and technical manuals he's been copying for months. He takes off without incident. Nobody at Bien Hoa is paying attention to one more aircraft launching. The tower isn't even manned anymore. Trung arms his weapon systems and, in a final act of sabotage before his defection, rolls into a dive and releases 2 bombs directly onto the flight line he just departed from. The explosions destroy 3 parked aircraft and ignite a fuel truck. Then he turns north and disappears. At the Newport docks in Saigon, U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander Richard Jane faces a problem that perfectly encapsulates the entire disaster. He has 12 massive cargo ships, loaded with military equipment destined for South Vietnamese forces, but those forces no longer exist in any meaningful sense. The ships contain tanks, artillery pieces, ammunition, vehicles, everything an army needs to fight, but there's no army left to receive it. "Sir, we need to make a decision," his executive officer says. "Do we offload this cargo, or do we sail?" Jane looks at the docks. They're under intermittent rocket fire now. Columns of smoke rise from a dozen points across the city, and on the roads leading to the port he can see the headlights of vehicles approaching, miles of them, a vast traffic jam of people trying to reach the coast. "We sail," Janey orders. "Everything stays in the holds. If we try to offload now, we'll have a riot. We take these ships to sea, and then—" He doesn't finish the sentence because he doesn't know what happens then. Will they take this equipment to another country? Will they sail it back to the United States? Will they dump it in the ocean? 3 miles away at the U.S. Embassy in downtown Saigon, Marine Security Guard Sergeant Kevin Maloney stands on the roof, watching the city collapse. He's supposed to be managing the helicopter landing zone, but there's nothing to manage anymore. It's pure chaos. South Vietnamese citizens are climbing the embassy walls using makeshift ladders, ropes, anything they can find. Some are former embassy employees. Others are people who've heard that Americans are evacuating from this location and are desperate for any chance to escape. The embassy parking lot is full of abandoned vehicles, Mercedes sedans belonging to Vietnamese officials, U.S. government cars with diplomatic plates, military jeeps, all of them left behind, keys in the ignition as if their owners might come back for them someday. Maloney knows they won't. A CH-53 Sea Stallion appears over the rooftops, approaching the embassy helipad. The pilot is fighting the controls, the helicopter is severely overloaded from the previous evacuation run, and the late morning heat isn't helping. The helicopter settles onto the pad with a groan of stressed metal, and before the wheels fully touch down, the cargo bay is swarming with people desperate to board. 30 only, the loadmaster screams. 30 passengers maximum. Nobody listens. 50 people force their way aboard, then 60. The loadmaster gives up trying to count and signals the pilot to lift off before even more people climb aboard. The helicopter struggles into the air, every gauge reading in the red, the turbines screaming. It clears the embassy roof by less than 20 feet, and Maloney holds his breath until it gains altitude and turns toward the sea. At Tan Son Nut, the situation has deteriorated beyond salvage. The base is being evacuated, but nobody told the South Vietnamese forces who were still trying to use it as a functioning military facility. A South Vietnamese Air Force C-130 lands on the damaged runway, and before it can taxi to a parking spot, it's mobbed by soldiers trying to board. The pilot, realizing he can't control the crowd, simply opens the throttles and takes off again with the cargo ramp still open and an unknown number of people aboard. Air Force Master Sergeant Thomas Noble watches this from the operations building. He's part of the final group of American personnel waiting for extraction, and he's documenting everything he can. Not with a camera, because he was told to leave his camera behind to save weight, but in a small notebook he's keeping in his pocket. His notes from 11:30 hours read, South Vietnamese F-5 fighter just crashed at end of runway. Pilot ejected, nobody responding to help. Fire spreading, another C-130 trying to take off anyway, going around the fire. 11:45 hours. Helicopter depot being stripped by ARVN soldiers. Watch them load spare rotor blades onto a truck. Where are they going with them? 1200 hours. Armory breached. South Vietnamese troops taking everything they can carry, Americans not interfering. What's the point? At the USS Midway, 75 miles offshore, flight deck crews are experiencing their own version of chaos. South Vietnamese pilots are arriving in stolen helicopters without radio contact, without clearance, without any coordination whatsoever. They simply appear, hover over the deck, and land. Or try to land. The problem is space. The carrier's deck can only hold so many helicopters, and these unexpected arrivals are piling up faster than the crew can move them. Aviation boatswain's mate David Morris receives an order he never thought he'd hear in his 22-year Navy career. Push perfectly functional helicopters over the side to make room for more evacuees. He and his crew approach the first UH-1 Huey. The South Vietnamese pilot who flew it here is long gone, already disappeared into the ship's interior seeking food and safety. The helicopter is intact, fully functional, maybe 3 years old at most. Morris signals to his crew and they physically push the aircraft toward the deck edge. 1, 2, 3, push! The Huey slides across the deck, picks up momentum, and tumbles over the side. Morris watches it fall 90 feet into the South China Sea, where it hits the water with a massive splash and immediately begins to sink. Through the clear water, he can see the rotor blades slowly turning as the helicopter descends into the depths. Next one, the deck officer orders. Over the next 4 hours, they'll push 45 helicopters into the ocean. Each one represents approximately $250,000 in 1975 dollars. Each one took thousands of man-hours to build. Each one is perfectly functional, and each one goes into the sea because there's simply nowhere else to put them. Lieutenant Commander James Knudsen, flying a CH-46 on his 8th evacuation run of the day, has a different perspective. From the air, he can see the full scope of the disaster. At Bien Hoa Air Base, he watches South Vietnamese soldiers loading a convoy of trucks with weapons and ammunition, clearly planning to continue fighting. But fighting how? Fighting where? The front lines are dissolving. At Long Binh, he sees the massive vehicle depot being picked over like a carcass, people taking what they can move and abandoning the rest. But what strikes Knudsen most is the order of the abandonment. The Americans are taking people and paper, personnel and documents. Everything else is secondary. Every helicopter he flies is crammed with evacuees but carries no equipment. He understands the priority. Human lives trump material goods. But he also knows that the equipment they're leaving behind represents billions of dollars and years of tactical advantage that's about to be handed to the enemy. On his approach to Tan Son Nhut for his 9th pickup, Knudsen sees something that will appear in his dreams for decades afterward. The entire flight line of the base, lit by the afternoon sun, showing row after row of helicopters, aircraft, and vehicles, all abandoned, all functional, all waiting for their new owners. He lands, loads 43 more evacuees, and lifts off for the last time. By 1500 hours, the last Americans are leaving Tan Son Nhut Air Base. They leave behind everything except what they can carry. On April 30th, 1975. 06:45 hours, Tan Son Nhut Air Base. Colonel Bui Tin of the North Vietnamese Army walks through the main gate of Tan Son Nhut Air Base expecting to find fortifications, resistance, or at minimum some evidence that the Americans attempted to deny their equipment to the victor. Instead, he finds silence punctuated by small fires and the morning songs of birds that have returned now that the bombing has stopped. His lead battalion entered Saigon 2 hours ago expecting street-to-street fighting. They encountered scattered resistance from South Vietnamese units that hadn't received the order to stand down, but mostly they found abandoned checkpoints and empty streets. Now, as Tin walks onto the airbase that represented American air power in Southeast Asia for more than a decade, he stops and simply stares. 50 meters ahead, a perfect line of UH-1 Huey helicopters stretches along the flight line. Tin counts them, 12, 15, 20, 23. He stops counting. The helicopters are intact, not damaged, not burned, not even obviously disabled. Their rotor blades are tied down with canvas straps as if the crews plan to return tomorrow and fly them again. Tin has been fighting since 1965. He's survived B-52 strikes that turned jungle into moonscape. He's seen entire villages obliterated by American firepower. He's spent 10 years dodging F-4 Phantoms and A-37 Dragonflies and helicopter gunships. The war he fought was defined by American technological superiority. The endless helicopters, the impossible logistics, the sense that American industry could replace any loss faster than North Vietnam could inflict it. And now, the helicopters are his. He approaches the nearest Huey cautiously, almost superstitiously, as if it might be booby-trapped or might somehow spring to life and attack him. But there's nothing. The cargo bay door is unlocked. Inside, the troop seats are folded up neatly. A maintenance log hangs on a clipboard from a hook on the bulkhead. Tin opens it and reads the last entry, dated April 28th. Transmission serviced, oil changed, next service due, 100 flight hours. The helicopter is ready to fly. Captain Nguyen Van Hung, a tank officer whose unit entered from the northwest, is having his own moment of disbelief. He's standing in a vehicle depot at Long Binh, surrounded by hundreds of M113 armored personnel carriers arranged in perfect rows. His entire battalion has 8 APCs, all of them elderly Soviet models that break down constantly and require constant maintenance with parts that are never available. Here, in this single depot, there are more APCs than his entire division possesses, and they're American APCs, newer, faster, better armored, with superior firepower. Hung climbs into the nearest one. The interior smells of gun oil and canvas. The radio is still mounted in its bracket. The 50 caliber machine gun is still pintle mounted in the commander's hatch, with 2 cans of ammunition secured beside it. He finds the ignition. There's no key, but there doesn't need to be a key because American vehicles don't use keys the same way Soviet ones do. He turns the switch, and after a moment's hesitation, the diesel engine roars to life. The fuel gauge reads 3/4 full. Hung sits in the commander's seat of an enemy vehicle that's now his vehicle and tries to process what this means. His division has been fighting with equipment that should have been retired 10 years ago, always short of fuel, always short of ammunition, always short of everything except courage and determination. The Americans, apparently, were fighting with so much equipment that they could just leave it behind. By 0800 hours, General Tran Van Tra, commander of North Vietnamese forces in the south, arrives at Tan Son Nhut to personally assess what's been captured. He brings with him Colonel Hoang Minh Thao, his chief logistics officer, because Tra knows he needs an expert to understand the scope of this windfall. Thao's initial survey is methodical. He walks the flight line with a notebook, documenting everything. His list grows. Aircraft inventories, 42 UH-1 Hueys in immediate vicinity. All appear functional. Further survey needed to determine total count. Maintenance facilities fully equipped, complete tool inventories, parts, warehouses appear stocked. Technical manuals present in English, translators will be needed. Fuel supplies, multiple fuel farms, underground tanks, uncertain volume but appears substantial. But then Thao reaches the armory complex on the base's southern edge, and his methodical documentation gives way to genuine shock. The armory doors are standing open, not blown open, not forced, just unlocked and open. Inside, the racks extend for hundreds of feet. M16 rifles by the thousands still in their storage cosmoline. M60 machine guns stacked like cordwood, boxes of ammunition marked with lot numbers and dates, organized by caliber. Thao has spent his entire career managing supply lines stretched across hundreds of miles of jungle, constantly under American air attack, always losing material to bombing and theft and the simple difficulty of moving things through terrain where roads don't exist. The Ho Chi Minh Trail, which the Americans bombed incessantly, required thousands of laborers working around the clock to move enough supplies to keep North Vietnamese units in the field. A single truckload of ammunition that made it all the way south represented a logistical triumph. Here, in this one building, there's enough ammunition to supply his entire army for months. At Bien Hoa Air Base, 20 miles north, Major Levan Thuan is experiencing his own revelation. Thuan is a MiG-17 pilot, one of North Vietnam's elite, trained by Soviet instructors, a veteran of dozens of aerial combats against American fighters. He's walking through a hangar containing 6 A-37 Dragonfly attack aircraft, and what strikes him isn't just that they're intact, but that they're better than anything he's ever flown. The A-37's cockpit is a revelation. Thuan has been flying by instruments that are 20 years old in a fighter where half the gauges don't work and have been replaced by handwritten notes taped to the instrument panel. The Dragonfly has modern avionics, working radios on multiple frequencies, a weapon system that's actually integrated with the aircraft's flight controls instead of being an afterthought. He finds the maintenance log in the crew room. This particular aircraft, tail number 8506, has 1,247 hours on the airframe and is due for a 100-hour inspection. In North Vietnamese terms, this is a nearly new aircraft. His own MiG-17 has over 3,000 hours and has been rebuilt twice. "Can we fly these?" his wingman asks. "Eventually," Thuan says. "We'll need translators for the technical manuals. We'll need to train on the systems, but yes, we can fly these." What he doesn't say, what he's thinking but won't articulate until much later, is that the North just captured an entire Air Force's worth of aircraft that are superior to most of what they've been flying for the past decade. By midday, General Tra receives preliminary reports from survey teams across the Saigon area. The numbers are so large that he initially assumes they're errors. Bien Hoa Air Base, 47 A-37 attack aircraft, 28 C-130 transports, 36 helicopters of various types, complete maintenance facilities, estimated 2 million gallons of jet fuel. Bin Thuy Air Base, 38 helicopters, 11 C-123 transports, intact control tower and radar systems. Long Bin Depot, 800 plus M113 APCs, 200 plus M48 tanks in various states of repair, 50,000 plus rifles, vehicle maintenance facilities with complete parts inventories. Newport docks, 53,000 tons of ammunition, most still in shipping containers, 2,000 plus vehicles, unknown quantity of supplies still on ships that were abandoned at pierside. Can Tho Airfield, 22 helicopters, 15 A-37s, fuel reserves. Phan Rang Air Base, 26 helicopters, 12 A-37s, complete communications facility including crypto equipment, still powered on. Tra reads through the reports twice, then calls in his intelligence officer. "Are these numbers confirmed?" "Sir, these are preliminary surveys. The actual totals will likely be higher. Our teams are still discovering new facilities and storage areas. At Newport alone, we've only opened about 30% of the warehouses. Higher. The actual numbers will be higher. Tra thinks about the war he's just won. 10 years of grinding attrition, 10 years of moving supplies down the Ho Chi Minh Trail under constant air attack, 10 years of fighting an enemy with seemingly infinite resources, infinite firepower, infinite helicopters to replace the helicopters they shot down. He thinks about the soldiers who died in ambushes, in bombing runs, in desperate firefights where North Vietnamese forces were outgunned 10-1. And the Americans just left. They left everything. They left enough equipment to outfit 3 divisions. They left aircraft that North Vietnam's Air Force would have traded entire squadrons to possess. They left ammunition that represents years of domestic production. They left it intact, functional, ready to use. At a radio repair facility in the Tan Son Nhut Communications Center, Senior Captain Pham Xuan An is making his own assessment. An is a signals intelligence specialist, and what he's found is potentially more valuable than all the aircraft and vehicles combined. The Americans didn't destroy their cryptographic equipment. They took the code keys and the daily cipher materials, but the actual hardware, the encryption machines, the frequency-hopping radios, the secure telephone systems is all here, and examines a KY3 secure voice terminal. This device, which enables encrypted voice communication that the North Vietnamese have never been able to break, is sitting on a desk with its power cord neatly coiled beside it. In a filing cabinet, he finds technical manuals explaining its operation, its vulnerabilities, its maintenance requirements. Photograph everything, he tells his team. Document every piece of equipment, every manual, every schematic. This information needs to reach Hanoi immediately. The Soviets will want this, the Chinese will want this, and North Vietnam's own Signals Intelligence Service will want it most of all, because understanding American communication security means understanding how to defeat it, not just here, but anywhere in the world where American forces operate. At 1500 hours, the first North Vietnamese T-54 tank rolls through the gates of the presidential palace in downtown Saigon. Photographer Huynh Ut captures the moment, the tank crashing through the ornate iron gates, the North Vietnamese flag flying from its antenna. This image will become iconic, the symbol of communist victory. But 75 miles away, Colonel Bui Tin is still at Tan Son Nhut, still trying to understand the scale of what's been captured. He's moved from the flight line to a warehouse complex, where he's found something that defies comprehension, a building the size of an aircraft hangar, completely full of spare helicopter parts, rotor blades, turbine assemblies, hydraulic systems, transmission components, all organized, all labeled, all inventoried. This isn't just equipment. This is an entire logistics system. The Americans didn't just abandon helicopters, they abandoned the industrial infrastructure needed to keep those helicopters flying for years. Tin sits on a crate of spare parts and lights a cigarette. Around him, his soldiers are beginning to explore, to understand what they've inherited. Some are laughing in disbelief. Others are silent, processing the magnitude of their victory and the magnitude of American abandonment. The war is over, and North Vietnam has just acquired the 4th largest air force in Southeast Asia without firing a shot. May 1975, 3 days after the fall of Saigon and the true accounting begins. Senior Colonel Dang Van Son stands in the Operations Center at Tan Son Nhut, now renamed Tan Son Nhut People's Air Base, and watches as his inventory teams deliver their 4th revision of captured equipment totals. Each revision has been higher than the last. Son commanded supply operations for the People's Army of Vietnam for 8 years, managing the seemingly impossible task of keeping North Vietnamese forces equipped while operating under the most intensive bombing campaign in human history. He knows logistics. He knows scarcity. He knows what it means to fight a war where every bullet must be carefully rationed. The numbers on the board in front of him represent the opposite of everything he's ever known. AR craft final count, 8 Su-77 helicopters, 430 UH-1 variants, 113 CH-47 Chinooks, 334 various other types, 73 A-37 Dragonfly attack aircraft, 36 C-130 Hercules transports, 26 C-123 provider transports, 22 AC-47 gunships, 91 F-5 Freedom Fighters, 940 M41 Walker Bulldog tanks and M113 armored personnel carriers, 430 pieces of artillery, 105 Mueller, 155, 175 mm, $790,000 M16 rifles, $76,000 M60 machine guns, $12,000 M79 grenade launchers, approximately 15,000 rounds of small arms ammunition. Approximately 1,000 artillery rounds of various calibers. Son reads the list 3 times. Then he calls in his deputy. These numbers, they're confirmed? Yes, Comrade Colonel, and they're conservative. We're still finding caches. Yesterday, We discovered a warehouse at Cam Ranh Bay with 500 Tau anti-tank missiles that wasn't on any of the South Vietnamese inventory lists we captured. We estimate we've surveyed perhaps 70% of the total facilities. Sun does calculations in his head. During the entire war, North Vietnam's domestic arms production, combined with Soviet and Chinese aid, provided perhaps 2,000 artillery pieces total to forces in the South. Now they possess 1,430 pieces of American artillery, just from what was abandoned, not counting what the South Vietnamese Army itself possessed. The mathematical reality is staggering. The United States abandoned more equipment in 2 days than North Vietnam could produce in 5 years. At Bien Hoa Air Base, Soviet Air Force Colonel Viktor Petrov is conducting his own assessment. Petrov arrived yesterday with a team of technical specialists dispatched by Moscow the moment they received word of the capture. The Soviet Union has been fighting a technological Cold War against American weapon systems for 30 years, trying to understand their capabilities through intelligence reports, defector accounts, and occasional captured samples. Now they have a complete inventory to examine. Petrov stands inside a C-130 Hercules transport, running his hand along the aircraft's structural members. This aircraft, tail number 56 SAS-0523, has 8,400 flight hours on its airframe and was last serviced on April 26th. According to the maintenance log, it's fully operational. The Soviet Union has nothing comparable to the C-130. Their Antonov transports are functional but crude by comparison. This single aircraft represents design sophistication that will take Soviet engineers years to fully understand and replicate. "What's your assessment?" asks Colonel Pham Van Dong, his Vietnamese liaison. "Your country just acquired capabilities that it would have taken you 20 years to develop independently," Petrov says bluntly. These A-37 attack aircraft, they're superior to our MiG-17s in every measurable parameter except pure speed. The avionics alone represent a generation leap. The weapon systems integration is extraordinary, and you have 73 of them. Petrov moves to a table where his team has laid out captured avionics components. This is an AN/APX-72 IFF transponder, identification friend or foe. Do you understand what you have here? This is the system that allows American aircraft to identify each other and coordinate operations. We've been trying to obtain one of these for 8 years. You have hundreds of them. But it's not just the sophistication of individual systems that impresses Petrov. It's the systematic completeness of what was captured. At a maintenance facility in Long Binh, Vietnamese technicians have found technical manuals for every major weapon system. Not just operator manuals, but complete maintenance documentation, wiring diagrams, parts breakdowns. There are training films, there are spare parts catalogs, there are troubleshooting guides. The Americans didn't just abandon equipment. They abandoned the knowledge infrastructure needed to sustain that equipment. At the Newport docks, the inventory process has taken on an almost archaeological quality. Supply Sergeant Tran Minh Duc leads a team systematically opening cargo containers, many of which were loaded onto ships that never departed. Container 3847 contains 500 PRC-25 field radios packed in Cosmoline, never issued. Container 3848 contains replacement batteries for those radios, 10,000 of them. Container 3849 contains handsets, antennas, and carrying harnesses. This is the American approach to logistics, complete systems fully supported with redundant supplies of every component. Duke's entire wartime experience involved operating with equipment that was perpetually failing, always short of spare parts, always requiring improvisation. Here, there are spare parts for the spare parts. How many containers total? Duke asks. At this dock, approximately 2,400. Many are still on ships at anchor. We estimate another 1,000 containers on vessels that were abandoned. Duke does rough math. If even half these containers hold usable military supplies, that's more materiel than moved down the Ho Chi Minh Trail in any single year of the war. And this is just one dock. There are 4 major port facilities in the Saigon area alone. At Cam Ranh Bay, the largest American base in Vietnam, the survey is revealing something even more significant than equipment counts: complete infrastructure. Lieutenant Colonel Nguyen Van Minh walks through the base hospital, a 500-bed facility with surgical theaters, X-ray equipment, a blood bank, sterilization systems, generators, and completely stocked pharmacies. The Americans evacuated the personnel but left everything else. There are surgical instruments still in their sterile packaging. There are bottles of plasma in refrigerators still running on generator power. There are antibiotics that won't expire for another 3 years. This single facility is better equipped than any hospital in North Vietnam, Min tells his survey team. Document everything. Medical equipment, pharmaceutical supplies, even the furniture and fixtures, all of it will be useful. But the hospital is just one element of Cam Ranh infrastructure. The base has power generation capacity that exceeds most North Vietnamese cities. It has water purification systems that can process millions of gallons per day. It has maintenance facilities with machine tools that North Vietnamese factories would consider state-of-the-art. It has a complete telephone exchange, a radio communications center, fire suppression systems, fuel storage that could supply operations for months. The Americans built Cam Ranh Bay to support 50,000 personnel with a level of infrastructure that North Vietnam couldn't provide for its entire army. And then they walked away from it. General Van Tien Dung, commander of all North Vietnamese forces during the final offensive, arrives at Tan Son Nhut on May 4th to personally review the captured equipment. Dung is a pragmatist who spent the war acutely aware of North Vietnam's material disadvantages. He walks the flight line looking at the rows of helicopters, and what he sees isn't just military equipment, he sees the industrial capacity that produced this equipment. How many helicopters did we shoot down during the entire war? Dung asks his intelligence officer. Confirmed losses? Approximately 5,300 helicopters, Comrade General. And the Americans replaced them all, every single one. They lost 5,300 helicopters and somehow still had enough to abandon 877 more. Dung pauses at a UH-1 Huey, examining its turbine engine. Do you understand what that represents? The industrial capacity to absorb those losses and continue operating without interruption? We fought this war on the edge of logistical collapse for a decade. They fought it with such abundance that they could simply throw equipment away. But Dung is also calculating future utility. How many of these helicopters can we actually operate? The answer is complex. The helicopters are intact, but operating them requires trained pilots, mechanics, fuel that meets American specifications, spare parts, and technical knowledge. North Vietnam has some pilots trained on captured helicopters, but not 877 pilots. They have mechanics who understand Soviet aircraft, but American systems are different. They have fuel, but not necessarily the right fuel in the right quantities. Our assessment is that we can bring perhaps 200 helicopters into operational status within the next year, the intelligence officer reports. Maybe 400 within 3 years. The rest will be used for parts or will require extensive training programs before we can operate them. Even 200 helicopters represents a massive increase in North Vietnamese air mobility. Before the capture, their entire helicopter fleet consisted of perhaps 30 Soviet-made aircraft, most of them elderly and maintenance-intensive. Now they have access to American helicopters that, despite being abandoned, are newer and more capable than anything in their existing inventory. The same calculation applies to every category of equipment. The 73 captured A-37 attack aircraft. North Vietnam might be able to field 20 within a year. The 1,530 artillery pieces, perhaps 500 can be integrated into existing units within 6 months. The 791,000 M16 rifles, these are actually easier. Rifles are rifles. And while the M16 requires different ammunition than the AK-47, North Vietnam captured enough 5.56mm ammunition to sustain operations for years. At Phan Rang Air Base, communications specialist Captain Nguyen Thanh Ha is making discoveries that have implications far beyond Vietnam. Ha specializes in signals intelligence, and what he's found in the communications center represents an intelligence windfall that rivals the physical equipment. The Americans destroyed or evacuated their cipher materials and code keys, but they left the hardware. Ha is examining an ANGRC-142 radio system, a tropospheric scatter communication system that can transmit encrypted signals over hundreds of miles by bouncing radio waves off the troposphere. North Vietnam has nothing remotely comparable. The Soviets have experimental systems, but nothing this sophisticated or this compact. More significantly, the system's technical manuals explain its vulnerabilities. Every communication system has weaknesses, frequencies that are more vulnerable to jamming, encryption protocols that can be attacked, design limitations that can be exploited. The manuals document all of this with typical American thoroughness. Photograph every schematic, Ha orders his team. Copy every manual page. This information goes to Hanoi immediately and from there to Moscow. This is more valuable than 100 captured aircraft. By May 8th, the inventory process is essentially complete, and the numbers are being compiled into a master report for the Politburo in Hanoi. Senior Colonel Sun, who began this process 5 days ago, reviews the final document. The total value of captured equipment, calculated at 1975 prices, approximately $5 billion. That's billion with a B. For context, North Vietnam's entire GDP in 1975 is estimated at $4.7 billion. The Americans abandoned equipment worth more than North Vietnam's total annual economic output. But the report includes something more significant than dollar values. It includes capability assessments. The captured equipment, if fully integrated, would triple North Vietnam's air transport capability, quadruple their attack aircraft inventory, provide helicopter mobility that previously didn't exist, supply their ground forces with modern weapons for a decade without new production, provide artillery that outranges anything in their existing inventory, deliver communication systems that represent a generational leap in capability. Sun attaches a personal note to the report. Comrade Ministers, these numbers represent not just equipment, but a revelation about the nature of our victory. We did not defeat the Americans militarily in any conventional sense. Their industrial capacity remained undiminished. Their ability to produce and deploy equipment remained superior to ours throughout the war. What we defeated was their political will to continue fighting. They left not because they couldn't continue, but because they chose not to. The equipment they abandoned proves they could have sustained operations indefinitely. We must understand this. We won because they decided to stop, not because they were unable to continue. This is both a validation of our political strategy and a warning about American capabilities should they ever choose to fully commit to a conflict again. At Tan Son Nhut, Colonel Bui Tin takes one last walk through the helicopter depot before returning to Hanoi. He stops at the same UH-1 Huey he examined on April 30th, the one with the maintenance log showing it was ready to fly. A week later, it's still sitting here, still ready to fly, still waiting for a crew that will eventually learn to operate it. Tin thinks about the 10 years he spent dodging these helicopters, fighting against the seemingly endless American ability to move troops, to provide firepower, to appear anywhere at any time. He thinks about the friends who died under attacks from aircraft exactly like this one. And now these same helicopters belong to North Vietnam, captured without a fight, abandoned by an enemy who simply decided the war wasn't worth continuing. He places his hand on the helicopter's fuselage, feeling the sun-warmed metal. This machine represented American power for a decade. Now it's a trophy. But as Tin walks away, he understands something that the victory celebrations in Hanoi haven't fully grasped. The Americans didn't leave because they ran out of helicopters. They left because they ran out of reasons to stay. The equipment they abandoned was replaceable to them. That's perhaps the most sobering lesson of all.